There's a kind of brightness inside you tonight, quiet but unmistakably awake. Your thoughts hold a strange clarity on nights like this, a clarity that doesn't ask permission, a clarity that rises even when everything around you grows softer. You can feel it in the way the mind stays alert, not restless exactly, but present in a way that refuses to dim. It's as if something within you decides to linger at the edge of wakefulness, tracing the outlines of feelings you haven't fully named. And even though the room is still your inner world, feels subtly illuminated, as though the night has pulled a thin thread of awareness upward, letting it hover there without urgency. There is nothing wrong with this kind of wakefulness. It doesn't mean you're unsettled, and it doesn't mean your mind is working against you. Sometimes it simply means that the deeper parts of your thinking have chosen this hour to come forward, not to demand answers, not to chase resolution, but to exist in their own quiet intensity. Nights have a way of doing this, revealing what was already there, yet softened enough to be felt more clearly. You might notice how your thoughts don't rush. They don't crowd. They hold a steady pace, almost gentle, almost contemplative. They arrive one at a time, carrying a thin sense of presence rather than noise. The world outside gives them space, and in that space they stretch, breathe, and shimmer lightly at the surface of your awareness. There's a certain kind of safety in this rhythm, the kind that lets you stay with your mind without feeling pulled or pressured by it. What you're sensing isn't a demand for action. It's a simple recognition, a moment where your inner voice is neither loud nor suppressed, just awake. This is the kind of awareness that doesn't ask you to sort anything out. It doesn't require understanding. It doesn't expect you to turn it into meaning. It's simply here, lightly illuminated by the quiet around it. And noticing it is enough. The night tends to heighten your sensitivity to subtle things, the texture of your breath, the tone of a memory, the slight shift in an emotion you didn't expect to feel. These aren't struggles or conflicts. They're small pieces of your inner life becoming visible in the dark. The quietness around you acts like a soft frame, holding your thoughts steady, letting them appear without judgment. You don't need to change them. You don't need to quiet them. You don't need to negotiate with them. Their presence is natural. You may feel a kind of gentle distance between the outer stillness and the inner brightness, as if they're two layers moving in parallel. The mind stays awake, but not in a way that pulls you upward. It's more like a soft glow, steady, mild, almost tender in its persistence. Thoughts drift in slow arcs, forming shapes that disappear before they fully settle. And that's the beauty of this moment. Nothing is fixed, nothing is heavy, nothing holds you tightly. This kind of wakefulness can feel strangely comforting. It's a reminder that your inner world has its own timing, its own rhythm. Sometimes it slows with the rest of the night. Sometimes it rises just slightly above the quiet, not to disturb it, but to float within it. You're not doing anything wrong. Your mind isn't resisting rest. It's simply staying with what feels meaningful to it right now, even if that meaning isn't obvious. You might sense a thin thread of curiosity weaving through your awareness. Not a question, not a search, just curiosity about the way you're experiencing yourself at this hour. There's something gentle in that, something almost soft-hearted. It shows that part of you is open listening, attentive to your own emotional landscape without trying to shape it. As the night holds you, your thoughts hold their shape quiet, but awake, steady, but not demanding. You don't need to interrupt them or push them down. Let them exist exactly as they are. Let them take up the space they naturally take. This hour belongs to them as much as it belongs to the silence around you. If you sit with this feeling long enough, you may notice how your mind begins to shift without any effort. The brightness doesn't disappear, it simply softens. It becomes less defined, less sharp, more willing to blend into the warmth of the night. Thoughts that felt bright a moment ago become gentle outlines. The pace slows. The inner voice lowers its tone, not because you forced it to, but because it found its own way toward quiet. There is no destination here, no goal for your thoughts to reach, no state you're required to enter. You're simply meeting your mind where it is awake, aware, softly illuminated, and allowing it to be what it naturally becomes in the dark. This is the first step of the night's unfolding, recognizing the presence of your thoughts without trying to dim them, letting them drift in their own serene, deliberate way. And as you continue, the night will shape them, gently carrying them toward a deeper softness as you move further along the quiet path ahead. Your mind carries a different kind of brightness in this part of the night, not sharp, not restless, just present in a way that quietly lifts the inner layers upward. Even without movement, you can sense how something inside you rises a little closer to the surface, as if the dark around you makes room for thoughts and feelings that stay hidden during the day. This isn't intensity, it is intention. It's simply the nature of nighttime, when everything outside becomes still. What's inside becomes easier to notice. There's a kind of openness in these hours that lets the quieter parts of you unfold, not because they want attention, not because they're trying to speak loudly, but because there's finally enough silence for them to be heard in their own tone. The mind doesn't need to settle for these layers to appear. In fact, it's often when the mind stays gently awake, like it is now, that the deeper textures of your inner world drift closer, soft and unhurried. You might feel it as a subtle shift, a change in the weight of your awareness, a light stretching of your thoughts, a faint emotional outline becoming noticeable. These aren't signs of worry. They're not signals that something's wrong. They're simply reflections of how the night works on the human mind. When the world dims, your inner space brightens just a little, making room for things you usually move past without realizing. The quiet around you isn't empty. It's a soft frame that holds your thoughts gently in place, without noise from outside the space within takes shape. You begin to sense tones, textures, shades of feeling that would normally blend into the background. And even if nothing specific rises, there's an unmistakable awareness that something inside you is more visible now, not loud, not demanding, just closer. This closeness can feel almost tender. It comes without force, without urgency, without expectation. Night doesn't push you into introspection. It simply removes the distractions that keep those inner layers folded during the day. So when they appear now, it isn't because you're overthinking. It's because the environment around you has become gentle enough to let your emotional depth breathe. As your mind stays softly awake, you may notice how thought and feeling start to interact in subtle ways. A single thought might carry a trace of emotion you didn't expect, A quiet feeling might drift into your awareness without being tied to anything specific. These small crossings are natural at night. The boundaries between thinking and sensing blur, creating that delicate inner brightness you only feel in certain hours. Nothing here needs to be named. Nothing needs to be explained. The layers appearing aren't asking you to interpret them. They're simply being revealed in their natural form, the way fog lifts from low ground when the air becomes still. The more you notice this, the more you understand that nighttime doesn't expose your inner world to overwhelm it. It exposes it so you can experience it without pressure. In this moment, your awareness rests lightly on these inner layers. You're not diving into them. You're not analyzing them. You're just noticing them with the same softness the night offers. The mind remains awake, but in a peaceful way, bright enough to feel calm enough to stay grounded. It's a rare balance, the kind that only appears when the outer world stops asking anything of you. And because the world isn't asking you, don't need to respond. You don't need to react to what you sense inside. These layers aren't arising to be solved. They're arising because the mind finally has room to stretch into its own subtle vibrations. The night quiets everything else so that this gentle brightness can exist without friction. If you listen closely, not with effort, but with presence, you may notice how these layers become clearer, not by intensifying, but by softening. The slower your thoughts move, the more naturally the emotional undercurrent flows alongside them. They're not separate forces. They're two tones of the same inner experience made visible by the stillness around you. There's a quiet acceptance in knowing this, a kind of understanding that doesn't require thought. The night isn't trying to guide you. It isn't trying to teach you anything. It's simply allowing you to meet your inner world in a different light, a softer one, a quieter one, a light that makes everything feel gentler than it would in daytime clarity. You may find yourself breathing more slowly without intending to. Not because you're trying to calm down, but because something in you senses the ease of this moment. Thoughts that felt bright earlier begin to lengthen into softer shapes. Feelings that were faint now drift closer, not to overwhelm, but to settle into their own place. It's natural for nighttime to do this, to reveal, without demanding, to soften, without directing. As you sit with this, the inner layers that surfaced don't require anything from you. They don't need decisions. They don't seek resolution. They simply want the room that night naturally gives them. And you can offer that room without effort by being here, by noticing, by letting the brightness inside you hover exactly where it is. Nothing more needs to happen. The layers are here. The mind is awake. The night is open. And all of it exists together in a quiet balance that holds you gently at the beginning of this journey inward, letting you feel the early shape of your inner world without asking it to change, fade, or settle. There is a softness settling around you now, the kind that doesn't ask you to quiet your thoughts, but simply makes room for them. The night has already opened its first layers, and you can feel how the atmosphere shifts into something steadier, something that holds you without tightening. This is where safety begins, not the kind you chase, not the kind you construct, but the kind that forms naturally when the world outside grows silent enough for your inner space to exhale. You don't have to do anything to create this feeling. It's already here, woven into the stillness of the hour. Your mind may still be awake, still carrying that faint brightness that hasn't dimmed, but there's a gentleness surrounding it now. A sense that your thoughts don't have to shrink or rearrange themselves to fit a quieter moment. They can stay as they are illuminated, lingering, and slightly restless without disrupting the calm that's forming around them. Emotional safety at night isn't about shutting parts of yourself down. It's about allowing everything inside you to exist without friction. When the outside world is full of movement and expectation, there isn't much space for that. But here, in this part of the night, the pressure eases. The mind doesn't have to defend itself. The heart doesn't have to hold its breath. Your attention doesn't have to split between demands or decisions. You're simply here, held by the depth of the dark and the slow rhythm that comes with it. You may notice how your thoughts begin to soften at the edges, not disappearing, not calming by force, just becoming less rigid. They move with a gentler curve, drifting instead of circling. Some thoughts remain bright, but not in a way that pushes against you. Their brightness feels lighter now, more fluid, more willing to sit in the same quiet that surrounds you. This is the beginning of emotional safety, the moment when your mind stops feeling like something you must manage and starts becoming something you can simply observe. There's no expectation in this space, no pressure to understand yourself, no obligation to sort through whatever arises. Night doesn't demand clarity. It doesn't ask you to trace your feelings back to their origins. It doesn't challenge you to solve anything. Instead, it wraps your awareness in something warm and open, something that says you can let your mind be awake without needing to justify it. You might feel this openness settling in your chest first, a subtle release, an easing of some internal tension you didn't realize you were holding. Or it may show up in the way your breath lengthens without effort, creating a soft rhythm that lifts and lowers your attention. These shifts don't happen because you're trying to calm yourself. They happen because the environment has become spacious enough for you to rest inside your own awareness. There's a quiet tenderness in recognizing this, a sense that your emotional world does not need to be hidden or controlled in order to be safe. Some nights make people feel exposed, but this one doesn't. This one makes room for you. It gives you permission to experience your inner landscape exactly as it is: bright thoughts, soft feelings, half-formed reflections, without needing to filter any of it. If you pay attention, you might notice how the atmosphere inside you mirrors the atmosphere outside, slow, open, unhurried. The quiet doesn't shrink your thoughts. It cushions them. It lets them rest in their fullness without creating noise. And the more you notice this, the more you understand that emotional safety isn't something you create. It's something you recognize, a shift, a settling, a moment where nothing inside you feels out of place. You may also sense how your emotions begin to approach you differently, not as waves pushing forward, not as echoes calling for attention, but as gentle presences that drift near the surface. They don't ask to be named. They don't demand to be processed. They simply exist, soft and subtle, woven into your awareness. Even the heavier ones feel lighter when they appear this way, as though the night itself softens them before they reach you. This softness doesn't require explanation. It doesn't require interpretation. Emotional safety is not a conclusion you must reach. It's a feeling that emerges when the inner and outer quiet meet. The night makes room for you, and in response, something inside you loosens. The brightness of your mind becomes less sharp. The layers of your emotions become less dense, and you can feel yourself expanding slightly into the stillness as though your inner world finally has enough space to breathe. Nothing outside has changed, yet everything inside feels different. The silence hasn't deepened, but your relationship to it has. You're no longer standing at the edge of it. You're inside it, now surrounded by its warmth. Your thoughts may remain awake, but their wakefulness doesn't create distance. It simply adds a faint glow to the dark, a quiet presence that belongs here as much as the stillness does. You are allowed to be exactly as you are in this moment, aware, alert, softly illuminated. Emotional safety isn't about quieting your mind. It's about recognizing that your mind can stay awake without disturbing the night, that your feelings can rise without overwhelming you, that your awareness can expand without needing to defend itself. The night accepts all of this, and in doing so, teaches you to accept it too. You don't need to invite calm. You don't need to encourage softness. The night is already carrying you toward both. The only thing you're doing is being here present, receptive, unhurried, and letting the quiet shape the boundaries of your emotional world at its own steady pace. The safety you feel now isn't a destination. It's a beginning, a gentle foundation that will guide the deeper parts of the journey as the night continues to unfold around you. Your mind holds a particular kind of wakefulness in this part of the night, the kind that doesn't surge or press, but lingers with its own steady glow. It isn't asking questions. It isn't reaching for conclusions. It simply stays alert, as if the deeper layers of your awareness have decided to remain open for a little longer. You can feel it in the way thoughts come forward, not rushed, not tangled, just present, each one carrying a faint outline of something you haven't yet fully touched. Recognition begins here, not through effort, not through study, but through noticing how your inner world behaves when everything around you grows still. The mind has rhythms you don't always see during the day. Sometimes it quiets with the dark. Other times it rises slightly, holding a thin shimmer of clarity that refuses to settle just yet. You are in one of those nights where the mind stands awake in the quiet steady, in its brightness, patient in its movement. There's nothing urgent in this brightness. It doesn't pull you forward, and it doesn't push thoughts into intensity. It's more like a soft pulse, gentle, rhythmic, sustained. You might sense how your thoughts echo in subtle ways. A single idea drifts into another, then into a faint memory, then into a feeling that doesn't fully form before dissolving back into the quiet. These shifts aren't signs of restlessness. They're simply the natural activity of a mind that hasn't yet dimmed. If you listen closely, you might notice how each thought carries its own tone. Some feel light, some feel heavier, but not burdensome. Some appear as shadows of past reflections, returning without insistence. You're not being pulled into any storyline. You're not being asked to unpack anything. The thoughts aren't layered with pressure. They're simply moving in their own subtle loops, drifting just enough for you to feel them, but not enough to overwhelm you. This is the moment where recognition turns into awareness. You begin to see the mind as something active, but not demanding, illuminated, but not intense. There's a tenderness in that awareness, a sense that your thoughts aren't something you must reduce or tame. They're part of your inner landscape, the living texture of your night. And the more you recognize the nature of this activity, the more you understand that wakefulness in the mind doesn't mean unrest. It only means that a certain part of you has chosen to stay awake with the dark. You might sense the beginnings of patterns forming, not as something rigid, but as gentle repetitions. A thought returns with a slight variation. A feeling drifts by again, but with softer edges. A question you didn't ask rises faintly, not to be answered, but simply to exist for a moment. These are the small motions of an active mind, the kind of motions that don't require engagement. They're there to be witnessed, not managed. As you sit with this awareness, you may notice that the mind's brightness isn't a disruption. It's a presence, a steady pulse of inner clarity. It doesn't jar you awake. It doesn't strain against the dark. It moves with it as if this hour was created for this exact rhythm. There is something deeply human about this, the way the mind finds its own pace at night, the way it rises or softens without asking you to follow. The mind can feel like a landscape in moments like this. Thoughts drift like faint contours. Emotions sit like soft hills at the edges. Awareness stretches and contracts without effort. Nothing here needs to be categorized. Nothing needs to be interpreted. The activity of your mind is allowed to unfold, to shift, to linger, to move in quiet arcs that you can observe without tension. Sometimes the mind stays awake because it wants room. Not space to solve, not space to unravel, but space to exist without interruption. During the day, thoughts compete with noise, responsibilities, movement, expectation. Here in this quiet hour, they can breathe. They can wander. They can rest lightly on the edges of your attention without needing to go anywhere. The gentle recognition of this is part of what makes the night feel intimate. It's not about understanding your thoughts. It's about seeing them without resistance, letting them appear and drift without trying to reduce them, allowing their brightness to be what it is, a natural shape of your mind at this time of night. If you stay with this feeling, you might sense how the activity begins to smooth itself out. The loops become softer. The echoes fade into gentler tones. Thoughts that were slightly bright become muted at the edges. The mind doesn't shut down. It simply changes texture. The movement slows. The arcs shorten, the inner brightness dims a little on its own. This isn't something you make happen. It's something the night does naturally. Recognition leads to softening, and softening leads to ease. The mind continues to stay awake, but in a quieter way, less bright, less defined, more willing to drift toward the deeper places the night will uncover next. You don't need to guide the process. You don't need to steer it. The mind knows how to transition from wakefulness into gentleness. It knows how to move from brightness into quiet without collapsing. Your role is simply to notice the way it shifts, to feel how it rises and settles in its own rhythm, to observe the active patterns without holding on to any of them. This is the heart of recognizing the active mind at night, understanding that wakefulness doesn't mean tension, that thoughtfulness doesn't mean unrest, and that your inner brightness is allowed to exist exactly as it is, steady, gentle, and softly alive in the dark. Your thoughts begin to move in a quieter pattern, now not quite looping, not quite repeating, but circling with a soft consistency that feels different from the brightness earlier in the night. The mind has its own way of echoing itself when everything around you slows. It's subtle, almost delicate, like a sound that doesn't fully reach the surface, but still shapes the space beneath it. You can sense the echoes, not as noise, but as gentle returns of ideas that drift through your awareness in familiar curves. These echoes don't come with intensity. They don't build pressure. They don't insist on being understood. They simply rise in soft waves, carrying shades of previous thoughts, fragments of old feelings, or faint outlines of moments you didn't expect to revisit. The night makes room for these returns. It gives them the space they need to appear without overwhelming you, to exist as quiet reflections rather than sharp reminders. As you sit with them, you may notice that these mental echoes feel different from the thoughts that open the night. Earlier, your mind was awake in a bright, almost alert way, standing in the stillness with a kind of gentle clarity. Now that clarity stretches into something deeper, something slower, something that repeats, not to demand attention, but to settle into your internal rhythm. It's the kind of repetition that comes from within, rather than from urgency, soft, natural, familiar. You might sense one thought returning with just a slight shift in tone. It doesn't feel like you're thinking it again. It feels more like it's drifting back, carrying a softer weight each time. Another echo might rise from a quieter corner of your awareness, not tied to anything specific, but still recognizable in how it feels. These small repetitions don't point to unresolved things. They're simply evidence of the mind settling in its own way, releasing its brightness in stages rather than all at once. There's a calmness to this rhythm. The mind is active, but its activity feels grounded now. It's not trying to wake you. It's not trying to alert you. It's easing itself through the natural transitions of the night, letting each echo soften the next. You can feel how each repetition becomes less defined, how the shapes of your thoughts turn smoother, how the night slowly weaves itself into the cadence of your thinking. You don't have to interpret what returns. You don't have to chase the meaning of the echoes. They're not clues or signals. They're simply the mind's way of releasing the last bits of clarity that remain before it moves deeper into softness. When the world outside is still, the mind has room to reflect. When the night is quiet, the inner layers unfold. These echoes are part of that unfolding gentle reminders that your thoughts have depth even when they drift lightly. Sometimes an echo carries a feeling instead of an idea. It might be a faint warmth, a mild heaviness, or a muted emotion that rises, lingers for a moment, then fades again. These emotional echoes don't create tension. They don't stir anything new. They glide in and out with the same softness as the thoughts they travel with, giving your inner world a sense of continuity, a sense that what you feel and what you think are woven from the same fabric, even if they touch you in different ways. The night makes it easier to sense these nuances. During the day, the mind moves too quickly to recognize subtle returns. But here, with the quiet surrounding you like a gentle layer of darkness, even the faintest echo finds room to be heard. You can notice how each thought bends into the next, how each feeling rounds its edges, how your attention shifts without effort. There is no rush. There is no expectation. The echoes simply form the ambient rhythm of your inner experience. You might even feel a kind of comfort in how these patterns appear. There's something reassuring about the way certain thoughts return unchanged, as if the mind is reminding itself that nothing urgent is hidden within them. There's something soothing about the way the echoes soften, showing that the mind is easing itself naturally without being pushed, without being silenced. Emotional safety begins to deepen here, not because the mind is quiet, but because its activity feels gentle enough to exist without resistance. If you stay with this awareness, you may sense how the echoes begin to stretch. They come with more space between them. Their tone becomes less sharp. Their presence becomes lighter. A thought that once felt defined becomes a soft outline. A feeling that once felt noticeable becomes a faint background texture. Your mind is still awake, still creating its subtle rhythm, but the rhythm grows calmer, slower, more aligned with the quiet that fills the night. Nothing inside you needs to hurry. The echoes take their time. They rise and recede, each return softer than the last. You might find yourself drifting through them without trying to follow, letting them appear and dissolve at their own pace. This is the mind transitioning toward deeper quiet, not shutting down, not dimming abruptly, but softening through repetition, loosening through gentle returns. As the patterns continue, you may feel the first hints of emotional warmth beneath them, a faint sense of ease, a small release, a gentle awareness that the night is holding you more securely now. The echoes become threads woven into a soft internal fabric, something warm, something steady, something that moves with the quiet instead of rising above it. You don't need to control the rhythm. You don't need to shape the echoes. Everything happening inside you is moving in a natural direction toward softness, toward stillness, toward a quieter depth that the night alone can uncover. Each echo finds its place. Each repetition eases the next, and slowly, the active mind begins its transition from wakefulness into something gentler, something calmer, something ready for the deeper layers that will follow. There's a quiet mechanism beneath your thoughts tonight, one that doesn't shout, doesn't strain, and doesn't rush, but still moves with a subtle certainty you can almost feel. You might not see it clearly, but you can sense it. The gentle hum beneath the brightness of your mind, the soft vibrations that keep certain thoughts awake even when the rest of the world has fallen still. This inner activity isn't loud or heavy. It's more like a slow, unfolding, a steady presence that reveals itself only when the night becomes soft enough to hold it. Your mind isn't simply full, it's active in a deeper way, shaped by layers that don't always appear during the day. Some parts of you remain alert because they're built to notice things, built to stay aware, built to keep a faint thread of attention open even when your body begins to settle. And tonight, that underlying structure feels closer to the surface, like the quiet heartbeat of your inner world making itself known. These inner mechanisms don't operate in rigid lines. They don't form clear paths or well-defined sequences. Instead, they rise in soft gradients, shifts in thought, small movements of awareness, gentle returns of feelings you didn't intentionally summon. They're subtle enough that you only sense their presence when the night lowers its volume, giving your mind space to reveal the quieter gears turning beneath your usual attention. You may notice how certain thoughts stay lit just a little longer than others. They don't demand energy. They don't grab your focus. They just hold themselves gently, like tiny points of awareness that refuse to dim. Beneath them is a layer of activity that steadies them, a layer that doesn't feel like noise, but like a quiet current that keeps the mind awake without making it restless. Sometimes this mechanism shows itself through the softness of your recall, how your thoughts drift toward the same emotion or the same tone or the same atmosphere without fully settling on anything. Other times, you feel it as a faint hum behind your thoughts, as if your mind is processing something too delicate to name. None of this is overwhelming. None of it is loud. It's simply the natural rhythm of an active mind in the dark doing what it always does when the outside world stops pulling it in different directions. There's a steadiness in this inner work. The mind isn't trying to warn you. It isn't trying to keep you alert. It's simply moving through its own quiet processes, loosening some thoughts, softening others, gently shifting the emotional weight of the day into something easier to carry. You don't need to determine what triggered this rhythm. You don't need to identify what it means. The mechanism isn't offering a message. It's offering movement, the quiet, unseen kind that brings your inner world a little closer to balance without forcing anything to change. You might sense moments where your awareness tilts slightly, where your attention drifts toward a feeling instead of a thought, or toward a memory that isn't fully formed but brings a subtle warmth with it. These are signs that the mind is working through layers that don't appear when you're busy. Not in a problem solving way, not in a searching way, but in a natural one, as if your mind is adjusting itself to the softness of the night. The more you notice this rhythm, the more you realize how deeply human it is. Night reveals the inner mechanisms not to overwhelm you, but to let you feel yourself more clearly. The darkness removes the noise. The stillness removes the hurry. What remains is the gentle system beneath your thoughts, the one that processes, integrates, softens, and prepares you for the deeper quiet ahead. It can feel like your mind is hovering in a space between wakefulness and ease, a space where thoughts maintain their glow but lose their sharpness, a space where your emotions remain present but not urgent. This is the part of the night where the mind transitions, not shutting down, not falling silent, but sinking into a softer rhythm where the mechanisms run without pressure and without direction. You might sense how certain thoughts lose weight as they drift by again, how certain feelings return with less intensity, how your awareness begins to widen, not to take in more, but to hold everything with more gentleness. The mechanisms behind your wakefulness do this naturally. They soften themselves with time, letting the edges blur, letting the inner brightness dim on its own, letting the night guide them toward a slower movement. And even as this activity continues, you remain steady within it. You don't need to interfere. You don't need to push the mind toward quiet. The night is already doing that gently through the subtle workings beneath your thoughts. They shift, they echo, they soften, and slowly, almost imperceptibly, the active mind begins to find its own path toward calm. This is not a process you control. It's a process you experience. The mind knows how to move from clarity into stillness, from brightness into softness, from wakefulness into quiet. And you are here, inside that transition feeling, the mechanisms turning in a rhythm, that belongs only to this our gentle human and deeply natural. There is a kind of movement inside you tonight that doesn't feel like thinking, not exactly, more like a quiet process happening just beneath the surface of your awareness. You can sense it without needing to understand it. A slow internal shift, a soft rearranging of thoughts that doesn't ask for your participation. This is where the mind begins to soothe itself, not by dimming entirely, but by softening the edges of its activity until everything inside feels less sharp, less bright, less insistent. You don't have to guide this. It's already happening in the background, woven into the natural flow of the night. What you're experiencing is not a shutting down of thought. It's a gentle transition from active awareness into quieter territory. The mind is still awake, but the wakefulness feels different now, stretched lighter, more fluid. It's as if something inside has shifted from holding to releasing, even if the releasing is slow and subtle. Sometimes the first sign of this softening is the way your attention loosens. Thoughts that felt clear begin to feel more distant, like shapes fading into a softer outline. They drift instead of staying fixed. They wander instead of circling. You can sense how the internal mechanisms you felt earlier begin to lose their structure, dissolving into something less defined. This isn't confusion. It's the mind easing its grip, letting its brightness melt into the atmosphere around you. You may notice pauses forming between your thoughts, small, gentle spaces where nothing rises for a moment. These spaces aren't empty. They carry a texture of softness, a sense of easing that doesn't need explanation. They're like the mind taking a breath without planning it, resting without asking. And each time one of these pauses appears, the quiet inside you becomes a little wider, a little smoother. The internal world moves differently when it starts to soothe itself. It drifts rather than pushes. It lowers its tone rather than brightening it. There's a kind of emotional softness that comes with it too, a tenderness in how the mind touches its own thoughts, as if everything inside you has become gentler in how it appears. Even feelings that carry weight seem less dense now, more like currents than anchors. You might sense a warm undertone rising beneath the fading clarity. Not warmth like comfort, but warmth like softness, the kind that settles without needing to be invited. It spreads lightly across your awareness, smoothing the tension you didn't know you were holding. This warmth isn't meant to fix anything. It's simply part of the natural rhythm of the night, the way the mind shifts into gentler layers as everything outside grows still. At this point in the night, you don't have to understand what's happening beneath your thoughts. You don't have to look for meaning. The mind doesn't need explanation to soften. It only needs the quiet, and the quiet is already holding you. You can feel how each thought that rises now carries less weight, how each one dissolves more quickly, how they move through you in quieter arcs. The world inside you isn't silent, but it's becoming less structured, less intense, more like a slow drift across calm water. When the mind reaches this stage, its activity becomes less about content and more about texture. You feel sensations rather than narratives, tones rather than conclusions. Something inside you shifts from thinking to sensing, from analyzing to drifting. The edges blur, the shapes soften, and the distance between thoughts grows longer, like a series of gentle waves that slowly widen as they travel further from shore. You may feel moments where your awareness feels suspended, not fully engaged, not fully resting, just hovering in the quiet. These moments are part of the soothing process. They allow your inner world to reset its rhythm without forcing anything. There's no expectation on you during this stage, no requirement to understand yourself, no need to perform any emotional or mental task. The mind simply transitions into a gentler mode on its own. And as this shift continues, you might notice that the brightness of earlier thoughts has dimmed into something more muted. It's not gone. It's just softened, flattened into a gentle glow rather than a sharp light. This glow moves in slow arcs through your awareness, shaping your inner space with a softness that feels almost effortless. You don't need to chase it. You don't need to hold it. It moves on its own, and you follow only by being present. There is something deeply human about this stage. The softening of thought, the quiet loosening of inner mechanisms, the slow drift into a calmer state. It's a process that unfolds in nearly everyone when the night becomes deep enough. A natural easing that doesn't need direction or control. What you're feeling now is simply your mind entering its gentler rhythm, following the path the night laid out for it without needing permission or guidance. If you stay with this sensation, you may notice how your breath begins to align with it, not because you're trying to breathe differently, but because something in you responds automatically to the softening. The breath lengthens on its own. The chest loosens. The body sinks a little more deeply into its own presence. This alignment isn't intentional. It's instinctual, a quiet synchronization between your inner world and the night around you. The mind continues to soothe itself in these subtle ways, letting thoughts fade at their own pace, letting feelings pass without anchoring, letting awareness settle into a steadier rhythm. You're not being asked to do anything here. You're simply witnessing the shift, watching the inner world move from active brightness to gentle dimming without effort. And as the minutes pass, you may sense how everything inside becomes quieter, not silent, just calmer, just softer, just more willing to rest. This is the beginning of the deeper descent that lies ahead. The mind has begun to ease. The inner mechanisms have relaxed. The brightness has softened into something warm and slow. All that remains is for you to stay with the quiet as it continues its natural path inward, carrying you toward the softer layers of night that come next. The emotional weight that appears at this hour isn't the kind that presses down on you. It's quieter than that, softer, almost hesitant, as if it's been waiting for the right moment to reveal itself without overwhelming you. Nights have a way of bringing this weight forward, not as a burden, but as a gentle presence that rises beneath your thoughts. It doesn't arrive with urgency. It doesn't demand anything from you. It simply shows itself in the quiet, taking a subtle shape that feels more like a whisper than a pull. You can sense it now in the way your awareness shifts from the activity of your mind to the tone that sits beneath it. The mind has softened the sharpness it carried earlier. The echoes have eased, and as that activity loosens, what lies underneath begins to surface the emotional residue of the day, the leftover sensations of moments you haven't fully named, the quiet feelings that didn't have space to exist when the world around you was louder. This weight isn't heavy. It's something else, something gentle, familiar, deeply human. It feels like a soft layer settling over your inner world, not to quiet it, but to give it depth. You're not being pulled into anything. You're not being reminded of something specific. The feeling is more atmospheric than concrete, more like a tone than a story. It's the emotion that appears only when the night becomes still enough, when the mind becomes calm enough, when your inner world becomes open enough for subtle things to be felt. You may sense it as a warmth behind your chest or a softness in the center of your awareness. It might feel like a slow exhale that doesn't quite complete, or a quiet shift in your mood that you didn't intentionally create. Whatever form it takes, it doesn't require understanding. Emotional weight at this hour isn't meant to be interpreted. It's meant to be noticed lightly, gently, with curiosity rather than analysis. There's a tenderness in accepting this weight as it is. It's the kind of tenderness that doesn't rush to push anything away. Instead, it allows you to feel the subtle emotional layers that the day kept hidden. Feelings don't need clarity to be real. They don't need definition to be valid. Sometimes, what you feel at night is simply the natural accumulation of living the soft residue left behind by everything you moved through without pausing to sense it. And when the night holds you like this, the residue rises not as a burden, but as a presence that lets you know you've lived, you've felt, you've experienced, even if you didn't acknowledge every sensation while it was happening. Emotional weight, when it appears gently, is often a sign that you're finally in a space quiet enough to feel the parts of yourself that stay beneath the surface. You may notice how this weight feels different from sadness. It isn't sharp. It doesn't come with storylines or questions. It carries no urgency. It's softer than melancholy and quieter than longing. It's a kind of emotional fullness, something that isn't trying to speak, but simply trying to be felt in its own subtle depth. In this softness, the night becomes a mirror, not a mirror of content, but of tone. The quiet outside reflects the quiet inside. The slow rhythm of the dark reflects the slow movement of your emotions. And the space between your thoughts becomes wide enough to hold the feelings that drift through you without needing to be named. There's nothing here to resist. The emotional weight is safe, even comforting. It belongs to you, but it doesn't confine you. It's the weight of being human in a world that rarely pauses long enough for you to sense the deeper layers of yourself. Night gives you that pause gently without demand. And in that pause, your emotions gather into something soft and steady, something that feels like a calm presence rather than a disruption. You may feel a slight shift in how your body rests. Shoulders loosen without direction. Your breath expands without intent. The quiet around you settles into your awareness as if it's been welcomed in. Emotional weight doesn't tighten you. It grounds you. It brings you closer to yourself, not through clarity, but through feeling. It's okay that the feeling doesn't have a name. The night isn't asking you to label anything. Emotional presence doesn't always need words to be real. It can exist as a tone, a softness, a slow drift beneath your thoughts. And the more you stay with it, the more you realize that this weight is gentle enough to be held without effort. There's a stability in this moment, a sense that your inner world isn't divided but layered mind above emotion, beneath both softened by the quiet. You're not being pulled into reflection, and you're not being pushed away from it. You're simply resting inside the depth that appears when the noise fades. The emotional weight you feel now is not a burden, it's a settling, a grounding, a presence that brings you closer to the warm center of your inner life. As you rest with it, the feeling may grow warmer, not heavier. It may spread slightly, not in intensity, but in gentleness. It may feel like the night is holding your emotions, with you sharing the weight instead of leaving you to carry it alone. And this shared presence, this quiet companionship between you and the dark, is where deeper softness begins. This is the moment where the heart starts to open slowly, quietly, without urgency. Not into longing or ache, but into warmth, into awareness, into depth. Emotional weight becomes emotional softness, and emotional softness becomes the beginning of something calmer, something steadier, something that will carry you into the deeper parts of the night that follow. There is a kind of softness that only emerges when the emotional weight of the night has already risen and settled into its place. It doesn't come forward suddenly. It doesn't introduce itself with force. It appears the way a quiet feeling does, slowly, gently, with a presence that feels almost accidental. And yet, once you feel it, you realize it has been there all along, waiting for the mind to soften enough and the night to still enough for it to be noticed. This softness isn't lightness. It isn't the absence of feeling. It's something much deeper, something that lives beneath the surface of your emotional world. It holds no urgency. It carries no sharpness. It feels like the natural continuation of the weight you sensed earlier, not replacing it, not diminishing it, but smoothing its edges until it becomes something warm, quiet, and deeply human. You may sense it as a slight warmth in the center of your awareness, a subtle loosening that doesn't change your thoughts, but shifts how they land inside you. Your feelings begin to move in slower rhythms now. They stretch, they settle, they linger with more gentleness than before. Nothing inside you becomes lighter, yet everything feels softer, as though the emotional tone of this hour has wrapped itself in a quieter texture. Sometimes, this softness feels like a sigh that never fully forms a release, that happens gradually rather than all at once. Other times, it feels like a faint glow, connecting your thoughts to your emotions, turning both into shades of the same quiet experience. The night doesn't need intensity to deepen you. It only needs space. And in this space, your emotional world unfurls into something calmer and more delicate. You don't have to understand this softness. You don't have to trace it back to anything specific. It isn't linked to a moment or a memory. It's simply what happens when the mind's brightness dims enough for the heart to rise with its own gentle tone. This is the moment where the emotional weight becomes less defined and more atmospheric, spreading through your awareness, like a warm layer that doesn't ask for your attention, yet still fills the inner space with a soft presence. You may notice how your thoughts respond to this shift. They no longer echo with the same clarity. They drift with the emotional undertone instead. They feel quieter, more rounded, less structured. Even when a thought holds some emotional residue, it doesn't carry it sharply. The emotion and the thought blend, forming something softer than either would be alone. This blending isn't confusion, it's harmony, a quiet merging that happens naturally when the night reaches this depth. Your feelings drift in small currents now. Some rise with warmth, some dissolve as soon as they appear. Some linger like a faint vibration in the background. None of them demand anything from you. None of them ask to be solved. They exist the way soft light does present, soothing, unhurried. You can feel them without losing yourself in them, and that alone creates a sense of calm that doesn't need to be constructed. If you pay attention, you might sense how the emotional softness curves inward, drawing you into yourself in a way that feels comforting rather than isolating. It doesn't pull you away from the world. It brings you closer to your own depth. It shows you that your emotions don't need to be loud to be real, and that the quieter layers of your heart hold just as much truth as the ones that speak more clearly. This quiet shift into softness is not passive. It has its own kind of strength, not the strength that pushes, but the strength that holds. It steadies you without tightening. It supports you without shaping you. It gives you a place to rest within yourself, especially when your thoughts have been awake for longer than you expected. You may find that your body responds to this softness too. The shoulders loosen slightly. The chest widens without effort. Even the breath feels different, not deeper, but smoother, more willing to follow the rhythm inside you than the rhythm outside. This physical shift isn't something you create. It's something that reflects what's happening internally as the heart begins to soften into the atmosphere of the night. There's a moment, often unnoticed, where the emotional softness becomes more than a feeling. It becomes a presence, something quiet, that stays with you even when your mind shifts from one thought to another. It doesn't fade when a memory drifts through you. It doesn't rise when a small tension appears. It stays steady beneath everything, a warm undercurrent that reminds you of the depth you carry without needing to describe it. You don't have to seek comfort in this moment. It's already here. The softness itself is the comfort, the way your emotional world finds its rhythm without being directed. Nothing inside you is being pulled apart or pressed together. Everything is simply settling into a quieter form. You might feel a small wave of tenderness, not toward anything specific, but toward the experience of being here right now, with your thoughts quieter and your emotions softer. There's something deeply human in feeling yourself this way. Something honest. Something real. It shows you the part of yourself that doesn't need clarity or resolution to exist peacefully. The part that can feel without resisting. The part that can soften without losing shape. As this softness settles further, you may sense how the emotional weight from earlier transforms completely. It hasn't disappeared. It has melted into something warm, something gentle, something that holds you rather than sits on top of you. And in this transformation, the night reveals a truth most people only feel, not articulate. Emotional depth does not always feel like heaviness. Sometimes it feels like quietness. Sometimes it feels like warmth. Sometimes it feels like softness expanding inside your awareness, slow, steady, unforced. This softness is your companion now, not in a way that distracts or consumes, but in a way that accompanies you deeper into the night. It's the emotional tone that will carry you into the next stage of your inner journey, where feelings move even more gently and thoughts drift into something quieter, something rounder, something almost weightless. For now, this softness is enough. It is the shape your heart takes in the quiet. It is the warmth beneath the stillness. It is the gentle layer that holds you as the night continues to deepen around you. There's a different kind of movement happening inside you, Now, not in your thoughts, not even in the emotional weight that is softened into warmth, but in the quiet way your feelings begin to shift when the night grows deep. It's subtle at first, almost invisible, a slight change in how your inner world breathes, how it expands and contracts without effort, how it drifts in slow patterns that you don't control but can feel. This is where emotions begin to change shape, not because something urges them to, but because silence gives them room to settle into their more natural forms. You might sense this shift as a loosening in the center of your awareness, not relief, not release, just a gentle adjustment in how your emotions rest inside you. The softness that appeared earlier begins to move. It doesn't intensify. It doesn't fade. It drifts like something lightly stirred by the quiet, creating small ripples in the space beneath your thoughts. These ripples don't disturb you. They don't push feelings forward. They simply show you that what you feel is not fixed, that emotions have their own slow rhythm, especially at night. When the world is quiet, emotions don't stay still. They stretch. They flatten. They rise in gentle arcs. They fall back into soft curves. This isn't instability. It's fluidity, the natural motion of a heart that's no longer holding itself together against the noise of the day. The night doesn't make emotions heavier. It makes them more honest, more able to move the way they want to move. You may notice how an emotion that felt warm a moment ago feels quieter now, how a subtle weight becomes lighter without disappearing, how a soft ache blends into something calmer. These shifts don't come with meaning. They're not signals or insights. They're simply the way your emotional landscape rearranges itself when it has enough quiet to breathe. There's beauty in this, the beauty of watching yourself feel without having to manage it. Thoughts respond to this movement too. They drift differently. They no longer echo with the same tone. They feel drawn into the softness shaped by it. Your inner world becomes less divided emotion and thought blend at the edges, forming something warm and unhurried. You're not trying to merge them. The night does it naturally, smoothing the boundary between thinking and feeling until both feel like shades of the same quiet experience. There's a tenderness in how these emotional shifts appear. They don't arrive with clarity. They don't come with stories. They show themselves through texture, the tone of your mood, the pace of your breath, the way your awareness wraps around certain feelings more gently than before. This kind of subtle emotional movement is often missed during the day because the world moves too quickly. But here in the softness of the night, even the faintest shifts can be felt fully. You might sense a moment where an emotion becomes rounder, less sharp, less defined. Not because it's fading, but because it's settling, losing its rigid shape, and becoming a gentle presence instead. This is the night's influence. It softens clarity into feeling. It lowers intensity into warmth. It lets emotions change without needing to know why they're changing. The quiet encourages emotional honesty, not through confrontation, but through openness. When everything outside stops demanding your attention, the deeper layers of your heart have room to move in ways that feel natural. These movements aren't dramatic. They're soft, subtle, almost like breathing. And yet they shift something inside you, not into clarity, but into ease. You don't need to label any of this. You don't need to ask what you're feeling or what it means. Emotional shifts at night don't ask for interpretation. They ask for space. They ask for softness. They ask for presence without pressure. And you're giving them exactly that by simply being here, noticing how the feelings inside you expand and contract in gentle rhythms that feel aligned with the quiet around you. Sometimes the shift feels like the heart becoming lighter. Other times, it feels like it's sinking into something calmer, something deeper. Neither is right or wrong. They're both forms of movement, both part of the natural cycle of emotion when the night wraps itself around you. You might feel your chest loosen slightly, not because anything resolved, but because nothing is asking for resolution. The night carries your emotions softly. It doesn't push them forward or back. It lets them rest and breathe and change without force. This kind of emotional drift can feel grounding even if you can't explain it. It's the moment where the heart finds its own rhythm, not tied to the logic of the mind or the demands of the day. The drift doesn't need to lead somewhere. It doesn't need to reveal anything. It's enough that it exists enough that you can feel its presence and move with it without needing to change its direction. If you stay with this sensation long enough, you may notice how the emotional shifts begin to form a quiet continuity. Feelings rise and fall with the same softness. Thoughts follow their pattern. Everything inside you moves together in a slow, synchronized rhythm. The night doesn't force alignment. It creates the conditions for alignment to appear naturally. And in this alignment, you feel held, not by answers, but by atmosphere. The deeper the night becomes, the more these emotional shifts take on a slower tempo. The drift widens, the warmth deepens, the softness spreads. The bright clarity of earlier thoughts dissolves into a muted glow, and you find yourself resting not just in your mind, but in your heart, the part of you that doesn't need logic to feel grounded, the part that doesn't need certainty to feel present. This is how emotions shift in silence, gently, gradually, without explanation. They change shape in the dark, the way light changes at dawn, softly, naturally, almost imperceptibly. And as you witness this shift, you realize that your emotional world doesn't need to stay still to feel safe. It can move, it can soften, it can drift. And still, you remain steady, held by the quiet that surrounds you and the softness that rises from within. There's a point in the night, right after your emotions have begun to drift and soften, when something more intricate starts to happen inside you. It isn't a shift in thought. It isn't a change in feeling. It's the quiet moment where the mind and the heart begin to move toward each other, each one softened enough to meet the other without friction. This meeting isn't dramatic. It isn't loud. It doesn't announce itself. It shows up the way a gentle alignment does, slowly, subtly, with a warmth that forms at the edges of your awareness before you even realize it's there. You might sense it first in how your thoughts begin to feel less separate from your emotions. A thought rises, but it carries a tone instead of a sharp edge. An emotion surfaces, but it feels guided by something steadier, something clearer. Neither one overwhelms the other. They move in parallel, like two quiet currents flowing through the same inner space without colliding. This is the beginning of the mind-heart interaction, where thinking becomes gentler because feeling is nearby, and feeling becomes steadier because thought has softened its grip. There's a profound quietness to this connection. It's not logical. It's not analytical. It's not emotional intensity. It's the soft merging of two parts of you that usually stay slightly apart. During the day, the mind often leads with structure, clarity, and focus. The heart follows with depth, warmth, and emotional truth. At night, when both have loosened and slowed, they begin to move together instead of taking turns. You can feel this union in the way the night settles inside you now. Thoughts don't feel as sharp, and emotions don't feel as heavy. Instead, both feel rounded, softened by each other's presence. The mind lends a quiet steadiness to your feelings, and the heart lends a subtle warmth to your thoughts. The result is a kind of internal harmony, not perfect, not absolute, but deeply calming in its simplicity. You may feel a quiet internal lowering, as though the center of your awareness is shifting slightly downward into the softer places. The mind no longer sits high and alert. It settles into the emotional space beneath it, and the heart rises just enough to meet it. The distance between the two narrows until their tones match, creating an inner atmosphere that feels unified and whole. It doesn't matter what thoughts arise in this space. Even if they carry emotional echoes from earlier, they move differently. They arrive with a gentler weight. They drift with warmth instead of brightness. The heart softens their edges, turning them into feelings rather than problems, textures rather than tasks. And the heart, in return, feels steadier because the mind is no longer pushing, no longer analyzing, no longer holding everything with tension. You might sense a faint softness between your thoughts, as if each one carries a thin layer of emotion wrapped around it. This isn't heaviness, it's tenderness. It's the mind allowing itself to feel without resistance. And below that, you might feel your emotions taking on small traces of clarity, not explanations, not definitions, just the gentle presence of understanding. This is the heart borrowing from the mind, letting itself feel without confusion. When mind and heart move together like this, the inner world stops feeling divided. There is no tug of war between what you think and what you feel. There's no pressure to choose one over the other. Everything blends into a single quiet rhythm, one that feels like breathing, one that feels like drifting, one that feels like being held gently from the inside. Your awareness expands here, not outward, but inward. The quiet becomes richer. The softness becomes deeper. You feel present in a way that isn't focused on thoughts or emotions, but on the space where they overlap. This overlap feels warm, calm, and deeply grounded. It's the kind of calm that doesn't require stillness. It simply arises because two parts of you have found a shared pace. This connection doesn't need to tell you anything. It doesn't need to deliver insight or clarity. It is its own experience, a moment where you exist inside your emotional truth and your mental awareness at the same time without conflict. It's the kind of harmony that can only appear when everything inside you has slowed enough to meet itself. As this harmony deepens, the night absorbs some of its quiet. The darkness feels less like an empty space around you and more like a container holding your inner world with a gentle stability. Thoughts no longer rise sharply. Emotions no longer drift unpredictably. Both move together in slow arcs that feel almost synchronized. You're not guiding them. You're simply witnessing the natural way your inner life unifies when the outside world is silent enough. You may notice your breath settle even more now, not into heaviness, but into ease. The inhale becomes smoother. The exhale becomes longer. The spaces between breaths widen gently. This is your body responding to the mind-heart, merging to the quiet, warm alignment that tells your nervous system it can loosen, that nothing inside you is pulling in opposite directions anymore. There's something quietly profound about moments like this. You're not trying to understand yourself, yet you feel understood. You're not trying to soothe yourself, yet you feel soothed. You're not trying to settle your thoughts or regulate your emotions, yet both settle and regulate naturally because they're no longer moving separately. If you stay with this sensation, you may feel the beginning of a deeper descent, a movement toward the human depths that come after this, where sensitivity rises and the inner quiet becomes even more intimate. But for now, you are here in the soft meeting point of your thoughts and feelings, where neither one dominates and both exist in harmony. This is the quiet center of the night, the place where the mind drifts and the heart opens, each one softening the other, creating a gentle balance that carries you deeper into the softness ahead. Certain moments in the night don't feel like thoughts, don't feel like emotions. They feel like you. Not the version you show during the day, shaped by expectation, pace, responsibility, or noise, but the quieter, more instinctive part of you that only emerges when everything else has slowed down enough. You're entering that space now, the part of the night where human tendencies rise not to reveal secrets or answers, but to remind you that what you're feeling is profoundly, beautifully natural. Everyone has a version of themselves that only appears after the world dims. A version that thinks more softly, feels more deeply, listens more closely to the tone of their inner world. You're not experiencing something unusual. You're experiencing something human. This hour is where the quieter instincts surface, the ones shaped by memory, connection, longing, reflection, and the subtle desire to understand yourself in ways you don't have time to understand during the day. There's nothing dramatic about this emergence. It doesn't arrive with force. It doesn't shift your mood abruptly. It comes as a gentle blooming of vulnerability, a soft, unnoticed opening of the emotional space inside you. Even if you can't name the feeling exactly, you can sense how your awareness touches it more tenderly now. Not with pressure, not with analysis, just with presence. At night, people naturally turn inward, not because they want to, but because the quiet invites it. There's a universal human pattern woven into this hour, a tendency to feel more clearly, think more honestly, and sense more deeply the things that lie beneath the surface. And you are stepping into that universal pattern, now carried by the softness the night has already given you. You may feel a gentle curiosity rising, not about anything external, but about the small shifts happening within you, a subtle wondering about why certain thoughts appear, a quiet noticing of how certain emotions drift through. This curiosity isn't a need for answers. It's your mind acknowledging your inner world with warmth rather than distance. Humans are built this way, to find themselves in the quiet, not in the noise. Other instincts appear here too. The instinct to hold your emotions gently instead of hiding them. The instinct to allow softness instead of resisting it. The instinct to feel connected to something deeper, even if it isn't named. These instincts aren't dramatic. They aren't revelations. They're quiet truths of the human experience, truths that surface only when the noise fades and your attention has room to rest. You might feel a small swell of tenderness toward yourself, the kind that doesn't need justification, a recognition that you're allowed to carry depth, allowed to feel gently, allowed to experience subtlety without understanding it. This tenderness is not weakness. It's humanness in its truest, most unobstructed form. Sometimes the night reveals the part of you that longs for softness, even if you rarely acknowledge that longing. Sometimes it reveals the part that wants stillness, safety, or connection. Sometimes it shows the part that simply wants to exist without the filters you wear during the day. And all of these tendencies, longing, softness, depth, reflection, belong to you naturally. Humans often feel closer to themselves at night, closer to memories that shape them, closer to quiet hopes they don't voice, closer to the feelings that drift through them with gentle persistence. This closeness isn't something you force. It's something the night uncovers. And you're feeling it now, not as a burden, but as a soft reminder of your own depth. You don't have to sort through these tendencies. You don't have to interpret them or place them in order. Night isn't asking you to resolve your inner world. It's simply giving you a moment to meet it without the distractions that keep you distant from it during the day. The part of you rising now is the one that feels without being asked, the one that listens without judgment, the one that understands your emotional truth, even when you can't articulate it. It doesn't require clarity. It doesn't require explanation. It exists quietly, steadily, as the most natural part of who you are. If you let yourself rest in this moment, you may notice how deeply universal this experience is. Millions of people across different places and lives share this same softness at this same hour, the quiet unfolding of their inner selves when the world goes silent. It's not something you're going through alone. It's something shared by every human who has ever paused long enough to feel the night from the inside. You may sense your breath aligning with the emotional tone within you, slower, deeper, more unhurried. Not because you're trying to control it, but because the part of you that feels deeply also breathes deeply. Humans breathe differently when they're close to their emotional truth. The quiet inside you now contains something warm, something alive, something deeply personal, yet entirely universal. You're not uncovering a problem. You're uncovering a pattern, a gentle one, a human one that brings you closer to yourself without pressing you for anything in return. And as this human depth settles into your awareness, it becomes clear that the night hasn't changed you. It has only revealed you the quieter version, the softer version, the version that feels more than it speaks and understands more than it needs to explain. This is the part of you that the night recognizes intrinsically, the part of you that moves in harmony with the stillness, feeling its way forward without urgency. You're resting inside your own humanity now, warm, soft, unforced, carried by the depth that only this hour can reveal. There's a kind of quiet that settles differently once you've touched the deeper human layers inside you. A quiet that doesn't feel empty, doesn't feel still, but feels present, as if something soft and wordless has opened beneath your awareness. This is where memory begins to drift in, not as images, not as scenes, not as stories, but as tones, as warmth. as the faint emotional imprint of moments that shaped you, even if you've never consciously held them close. You're not remembering anything specific. Nothing sharp appears. Nothing vivid emerges. Instead, there is a sense, a gentle familiarity that moves through your inner world like a warm breath. Memory at this hour doesn't behave the way memory does during the day. It doesn't form pictures, and it doesn't arrive with narrative. It comes as emotional presence, the lingering trace of who you have been and what you have felt across the chapters of your life, all condensed into quiet sensations that rise without needing to be understood. You might feel this memory as a slight pull inside your chest, or a soft lift behind your awareness, or a tender heaviness that has no single origin. It's subtle, it's warm, it's human, and it reminds you that your emotional present is always woven from pieces of your emotional past, not in a haunting way, not in a painful way, in a natural way, the way warmth remains on your skin long after the sun has set. Night makes this presence easier to feel. When the world is loud, the mind relies on thought. When the world is still, the mind relies on memory, not to recall, but to sense, to feel the continuity between who you were and who you are in the quietest possible form. It's not nostalgia. It's not reflection. It's more like standing in the soft shadow of your own history and feeling its warmth without needing to turn around to see it. There's a tenderness in this kind of memory. It doesn't demand. It doesn't search. It doesn't carry weight. It arrives like a quiet companion, a soft echo of the emotions you've lived through the moments of care, the moments of longing, the moments of change, the moments of quiet that shape the way you feel now. These aren't active memories. They're emotional residues drifting forward just enough to let you sense the depth inside you. Sometimes this presence feels like a faint ache, not a sharp one, a gentle ache, the kind that comes when something inside you recognizes its own history. Other times, it feels like warmth, the kind that moves upward slowly, as if rising from a place deeper than thought. And sometimes, it feels like softness, a cushion beneath your awareness that wasn't there moments ago. Whatever tone it takes, it carries no urgency. It simply lets you know that your emotional life is older than this moment, layered, lived, and quietly held. You might notice how your awareness expands slightly as this emotional presence rises. The space inside you widens, not outward, but inward, like a room you didn't realize existed, opening just a little more. The sensations don't crowd you. They don't fill the room. They simply broaden it, giving your inner world a sense of continuity and warmth you can rest inside without effort. Thoughts respond to this expansion too. They move more slowly, more quietly. They drift through the warmth of emotional presence rather than skimming above it. They feel grounded, softened, guided by something deeper than their own structure. The heart responds as well. It beats with a gentler rhythm, not slower, but steadier, in tune with the emotional tone rising quietly from memory. And as these layers settle, you may sense the first hint of something more profound, the realization that the emotional presence inside you isn't random. It comes from lived experience, from the way your inner world has shaped itself across time. You're not encountering feelings without history. You're encountering the soft glow of the things that mattered, the things that changed you, the things that live inside you even now, without needing to be revisited directly. But the beauty of this moment is that none of this needs to be conscious. The night isn't asking you to look back. It isn't inviting you to recall. It's simply giving you space to feel the warmth of where you've been, without images, without memories, without stories. Just the emotional truth that your life has depth, and that depth is present in you, even when you're not thinking about it. This emotional presence doesn't anchor you. It supports you. It doesn't pull you backward. It allows you to rest more deeply in where you are. There is a gentle confidence in feeling yourself connected to your own past in this soft, atmospheric way. A sense that your emotions didn't appear tonight out of nowhere, but rose from the long, warm continuum of your own experience. If you sit with this feeling a little longer, you may notice how memory softens even more, becoming less like a presence and more like a tone, a hum beneath your awareness. Something warm that stays with you even when no clear feeling rises. Something that makes the quiet feel fuller, the night feel deeper, and your inner world feel grounded. This is how memory moves at night, not through recollection, but through presence, through warmth, through the subtle emotional texture that reminds you of your own humanity without needing to show you any images from your past. You're not revisiting anything. You're simply feeling the depth of everything you've lived, expressed in the softest possible language, one that the mind doesn't speak, but the heart understands instantly. And as this emotional presence settles into your awareness, it gently prepares you for what comes next, the deeper sensitivity that emerges when the night grows even quieter, when the heart becomes even softer, when the human depth inside you reveals itself with more clarity. For now, let this warmth stay with you, not as memory you must revisit, but as emotional presence you can rest inside as the night leads you gently deeper. There's a kind of sensitivity that only reveals itself once memory has softened into presence, a sensitivity that doesn't overwhelm, doesn't sting, doesn't sharpen anything inside you. It moves the opposite way inward, deeper, gentler. It feels like the quietest part of your emotional world is waking up not suddenly, but gradually, as if stirred by the warmth that memory left behind. You don't feel exposed. You don't feel vulnerable in a fragile sense. You feel open, open in a way that only happens when the night has grown deep enough to hold you without asking anything from you. This sensitivity isn't about intensity. It isn't about heightened emotion or sharp reflection. It's about depth, the depth that lives underneath the layers you usually navigate. You might sense it first as a softening of your inner boundaries, a gentle dissolving of whatever small walls the day naturally builds without your awareness. You don't drop your guard. It simply lowers itself because nothing in this hour requires protection. The darkness outside becomes a soft shelter, and the darkness inside becomes a quiet landscape inviting you into the deeper parts of your own humanity. Here, sensation replaces analysis. Presence replaces effort. You're not thinking about yourself. You're feeling yourself. Not in a heavy way, not in a nostalgic way, in a human way. In the way that lets you sense the fragile, tender, honest parts of who you are without pressure, without expectation, without judgment. Your mind, softened by the earlier stages of the night, no longer stands apart from your feelings. It stands beside them, moving quietly in the same direction. Thoughts come through with emotional warmth instead of clarity. Emotions rise with gentle understanding instead of weight. Everything inside you moves with the same rhythm, now slow, warm, steady. The boundaries between thinking and feeling blur not into confusion, but into harmony. This is where your sensitivity shows itself, not as sharpness, but as depth, not as vulnerability, but as openness, not as ache, but as resonance. You may feel it in the way a simple thought settles deeper than usual, touching an emotional layer you didn't expect it to reach. You may feel it in how an emotion rises with more clarity, not because it's strong, but because the quiet allows you to sense its true shape. You may feel it in how your breath seems to connect to your internal landscape, and how each inhale brushes against the softness inside you, and each exhale carries a trace of warmth outward. This sensitivity doesn't unsteady you, it grounds you. It reminds you that being human means carrying depth even when you're not conscious of it. During the day, that depth stays tucked beneath routine tasks, distraction. At night, that depth rises not to overwhelm, but to be felt briefly gently as a reminder of who you are beneath everything else. You might sense long-lost emotions appearing not as memories, but as tones, warm, muted, indistinct, like echoes of past versions of you drifting through your awareness with no story attached. You don't need to trace them. You don't need to understand them. Their presence alone is enough. They're here not to pull you backward, but to show you the continuity of your emotional life, how every feeling you've ever carried still lives quietly somewhere within you, softened by time. This sensitivity also reveals how deeply connected you are to the world around you, even when you're alone. You're feeling the part of yourself that understands without logic, that recognizes small truths, without language, that senses meaning without needing structure. It's the instinctive part of you, the part that knows how to feel deeply without collapsing, how to open without losing shape, how to drift inward without getting lost. There's something profoundly gentle about this stage of the night. You're not diving into depth, you're sinking into it, slowly, safely guided by the softness that has been building inside you since the mind first began to dim. The deeper you sink, the more you sense the quiet wisdom of your own emotional world, the kind that doesn't speak in words, doesn't offer conclusions, but offers presence. Warm, steady presence. You may notice your breath changing again, not deeper, not slower, but quieter, as if your body is matching the inner softness without any instruction. Your awareness spreads lightly across your inner world, touching emotions with tenderness, thoughts with warmth, memory with calm. You move through your inner landscape as if through dim light, sensing shapes without needing to see them clearly. This is human quietude, the rare state where your entire inner world aligns into softness. No resistance, no urgency, no dividing lines, just depth, just awareness, just the quiet truth of your existence, rising gently to the surface, revealing itself in the most delicate way. And in this moment, you understand something without needing to articulate it, that there is a version of you who is softer than the one you show during the day, more sensitive, more open, more attuned to your own emotional reality, and that this version of you is just as real, maybe even more real, than the one shaped by noise, motion, and responsibility. This depth doesn't overwhelm you because the night holds it gently. It lets you step into your own humanity without asking for anything in return. You're not solving. You're not reflecting. You're simply being tenderly, deeply quietly. And as this sensitivity settles more fully into your awareness, it becomes a foundation for the next descent, the one where softness meets understanding, where depth meets stillness, where the emotional truth inside you becomes even clearer in the quiet beyond this moment. There's a kind of gentleness settling into you now, not the gentleness that comes from comfort, and not the kind that comes from ease. This is the gentleness of recognition, the moment when you begin to sense that everything you've been feeling tonight, everything that has softened and shifted and drifted inside you, is not unusual, not strange, not a sign of anything wrong. It's simply human, deeply, quietly, profoundly human. This part of the night brings a quiet redefinition of what normal means for your inner world. Not the version shaped by daytime expectations, where thoughts must be quick, where emotions must be controlled, where awareness must stay sharp and purposeful. Here, normal looks entirely different. It looks like softness, like openness, like emotional depth that doesn't need explanation, like thoughts that drift instead of organize themselves, like a mind that stays awake without urgency, like a heart that rises without warning. You're not supposed to be anything other than this. You're not supposed to push feelings down or brighten thoughts artificially or silence the internal shifts that happen when the world goes dark. This state, this quiet, tender, layered state, is part of you, and it always has been. Night simply gives you permission to feel it without resistance. You may notice how your inner experience expands here, not outward inward. There is more space inside you than you realized. More room for softness, more room for emotional weight, more room for subtlety. The quiet has revealed a depth that isn't dramatic, isn't intense. It's natural. It's steady. It's the depth of being human in the dark, when all the noise fades and only the true tones remain. Thoughts continue to move, but they move with less structure now. They drift through the quiet like soft shapes. They don't rush to conclusions. They don't demand interpretation. They feel natural in their looseness, as if the mind finally understands it doesn't need to hold itself together in the same way it does during the day. Night has reshaped what clarity means, not sharpness, but presence, not control, but awareness. Emotions, too, take on a new form of normalcy. They don't feel like disruptions. They don't feel like signals. They feel like currents of truth, the honest flow of your inner world allowed to move without tension. Even heavier emotions feel softer here, as though the night has wrapped them in something warm enough to keep them from pressing too hard. You might sense how your breath fits into this new definition. It doesn't try to deepen. It doesn't try to steady itself. It simply follows the softness inside you, taking its shape from the calm, warm presence of your emotional world. Breath becomes another expression of your humanity, unstructured, unforced, natural. There's something important revealed in this part of the night, that you don't need to be lifted, fixed, or changed in order to feel whole. You only need space and quiet and the freedom to feel yourself without the weight of expectation. The night gives you that freedom. It allows you to meet the parts of yourself that the day rushes past, the parts that feel things gently, the parts that think in slower rhythms, the parts that carry emotion like a soft hum beneath your awareness. When these parts appear, they don't represent instability or fragility. They represent you unfiltered and unguarded. As this realization settles, you may feel a strengthening softness, a sense that being as you are in this exact emotional state is perfectly normal. The depth, the warmth, the tenderness, the drifting thoughts, the shifting emotions, the quiet sensitivity. None of it is an exception. None of it is a flaw. It's all part of the way a human inner world moves when there is enough silence to support it. This gentle acceptance becomes part of the night's rhythm. You sense how your inner world aligns with the softness around you. You feel the boundaries between thought and feeling becoming less important. You notice how less effort is needed to simply exist inside your own emotional truth. There's no pressure to understand yourself, no need to come to conclusions, no reason to search for meaning. The night isn't teaching you anything new. It's reminding you of something old, something instinctive, something you've always known on some level, that the emotional depth inside you is not something to shrink from. It's something to recognize, to allow, to soften into. This awareness creates a shift inside you, a small, warm shift that feels like your inner world settling into itself with more confidence. You don't need to resist your feelings or correct your thoughts or reshape the softness that has risen. Everything you're experiencing fits perfectly into the human emotional spectrum, especially at this hour, especially in this quiet. And as this new definition of normalcy takes its place inside you, the night grows gentler. The emotional atmosphere inside you becomes steadier. The softness deepens without sinking. The warmth broadens without overwhelming. You feel yourself resting inside a version of quiet that honors the truth of who you are, not the daytime version, but the deeper one, the one revealed only in the silence of late hours. This is the essence of emotional naturalness, the recognition that nothing inside you is out of place, that everything you feel belongs, that your depth is not a disruption, it's a home. And as the night carries you forward, this sense of naturalness becomes the foundation for the soft descent that follows the gradual lowering into deeper quiet, where thought and feeling fade into something even more peaceful. For now, let this truth stay with you. You are exactly where you're meant to be, feeling exactly what humans feel when the world grows quiet enough for the heart to rise and the mind to soften. There is a kind of dimming that doesn't feel like fading out. It feels like settling in. You're entering that part of the night where everything inside you begins to lower in its own slow rhythm, where thoughts loosen their brightness, emotions soften their outlines, and your awareness begins to drift into a quieter layer, without effort, without intention, without direction. This isn't the silence of emptiness. It's the silence of soft descent, the moment where everything that was gently illuminated earlier begins to move toward a deeper calm. Nothing inside you disappears. Nothing shuts down. It all simply shifts into a lower register, like a warm tone, dropping into something softer, something steadier. The night holds you differently now. The earlier clarity you felt has turned into a muted glow spreading rather than shining. The emotional softness that had risen now disperses into your awareness like a quiet warmth, no longer gathered in one place, but woven through everything you feel. You may notice how thoughts change first. Their shape loosens, Their rhythm slows. They drift with more space between them, more ease, more softness. Even when a thought carries weight, the weight feels cushioned, gentled by the emotional warmth underneath it. Nothing asks to be examined. Nothing feels urgent. The mind lowers, not by shutting down, but by softening its grip, releasing the need to hold on to anything with clarity. The heart follows this downward movement, not falling, settling. Feelings that were subtly shifting earlier now spread out, blending into the quiet. They become background warmth rather than front of mind presence. They don't need attention to exist. They don't need space to feel real. They reside as soft tones underneath your awareness, steady and gentle, like the last light of dusk, lingering long after the sun has set. Your breath mirrors this shift. You don't breathe deeper. You breathe quieter. Your chest loosens in small, unnoticed ways. There is more air between your thoughts, more space inside your awareness. You're not trying to calm yourself. The night is doing that for you, lowering everything inside you, gradually, naturally, without any demand or instruction. You're allowed to follow this lowering without thinking about it, without managing it, without defining it. This dimming doesn't mean you're falling asleep. It means the emotional and mental layers inside you are choosing rest, choosing soft edges instead of sharp ones, choosing ease instead of structure, choosing warmth instead of brightness. Your awareness remains present, but it becomes gentler, quieter, more willing to let the night guide it toward an even slower rhythm. You may sense moments where nothing rises inside you, no thought, no feeling, no memory, just space, just quiet. These moments aren't empty. They're full of softness, full of the room your inner world finally has to rest. This space isn't something you create. It's something that emerges naturally when everything inside you settles enough for silence to take its rightful place. The silence isn't cold. It's warm. It's safe. It's the part of the night that holds you without speaking. The dimming becomes more noticeable the longer you sit with it. Thoughts lose their edges, drifting like faint silhouettes rather than defined shapes. Emotions lose their outlines, becoming tones rather than sensations. Even the connection between your thoughts and feelings softens into something quieter, a slow blend that doesn't tug at you, doesn't invite interpretation, doesn't require presence. It simply exists as an internal quiet that feels stable and deep. In this lowered state, your inner world becomes more spacious. Everything moves slower, speaks softer, fades more quickly and more comfortably. There is a warmth that sits beneath all of it, a warmth that isn't tied to any memory, any thought, or any emotion. It's simply the warmth of being at ease, the warmth of sinking, the warmth of being held by the night. You might sense the night drawing closer to you, not physically, but emotionally, the way the quiet feels, like it's wrapping itself gently around your awareness. It doesn't close in. It doesn't confine. It comforts. It creates a boundary around your inner world that makes lowering feel safe. It lets you move into deeper quiet without fear of what you'll find there. Everything feels warm enough, soft enough, steady enough to trust. This emotional lowering doesn't remove anything you felt tonight. It integrates it. Everything that rose earlier, the brightness of your thoughts, the warmth of your feelings, the tenderness of your heart, the depth of your human patterns gently folds into the softness. Nothing is lost. Everything becomes quieter. Everything feels more unified. You're sinking into your own depth in the most peaceful way possible. And as this lowering continues, you begin to feel a soft hum beneath your awareness, not a thought, not an emotion, but a sensation of stillness. It feels like your entire inner world is exhaling slowly, settling into a gentle state where nothing pushes and nothing pulls. This hum is the night's way of preparing you for what comes next. It's the foundation of rest, the beginning of deep quiet, the transition into a place inside yourself that feels almost weightless. You're not falling asleep, you're falling into stillness. And stillness is different. Stillness is soft. Stillness is warm. Stillness is spacious. Stillness is steady. It's the state where your inner world is no longer trying to shape itself. It simply exists, quietly, gently, naturally. This lowering is not the end of the night's path. It is the doorway, a soft threshold into the deeper quiet waiting beyond. And as you rest in this warm dimming, you'll feel yourself ready, not because you tried to be, but because the night has carried you here with tenderness, guiding you step by gentle step into the quiet that comes next. There is a moment in the night, quiet unannounced, almost imperceptible, when the mind and the heart both stop reaching outward and begin to turn inward in a way that feels softer than anything that came before. You're entering that moment now. Not because you've chosen to, not because you're directing yourself toward calm, but because everything inside you has lowered enough to make space for a new kind of stillness. A stillness that doesn't silence you, but holds you. What rises here is not clarity, not revelation, not insight. It's permission, the quiet kind, the kind that doesn't use words, the kind that settles inside you, the way darkness settles into a room after the last light fades. It doesn't tell you to rest. It doesn't ask you to rest. It simply lets you feel that rest is possible, that nothing inside you needs to stay awake with the same alertness it held earlier in the night. You might sense this permission as a soft easing in the chest, a subtle shift in how the breath enters and leaves your body. Not deeper, not slower, just smoother, like the breath has finally stopped brushing against anything sharp or bright. You're not trying to breathe differently. Your body is responding to the quiet within you, the soft hum that has replaced the earlier activity of your thoughts. Your mind is still awake, but awake in a gentler way. The brightness that once lingered there has dimmed into something warm and low. Thoughts no longer come in sequences. They drift individually, spaced apart, softened by the emotional warmth that surrounds them. Even the thoughts that carry weight feel quieter now, as though they've laid down whatever they were holding and are simply resting in the same softness as the rest of you. This is the moment where you no longer need to manage your inner world. You've moved far enough into the night that everything inside you adjusts its own rhythm. There is no pressure to think, no pressure to feel, no pressure to interpret the sensations rising or fading inside you. You're simply here, wrapped in quiet, held by softness, free from the demand to untangle or organize anything. And beneath your awareness, something deeper is lowering itself too, a subtle, emotional noise you didn't realize you were carrying. It doesn't disappear. It just quiets. It becomes part of the background instead of the foreground. You may feel a sense of emptiness begin to open, but it is not cold or hollow. It's peaceful. It's the kind of emptiness that gives you room to breathe, room to rest, room to sink into yourself without resistance. If you pay attention, you might notice how your awareness floats differently now. It doesn't cling to thoughts. It doesn't chase feelings. It hovers gently above both, like a leaf suspended between two currents. This hovering isn't uncertainty. It's ease, the first sign that your mind is close to letting go of its usual grip. The first sign that your heart no longer needs to hold anything tightly. You are not drifting away from yourself. You are drifting into yourself, deeper than before, softer than before, safer than before. The night has reached a place inside you that only appears when everything else quiets enough to let it be felt. You may sense warmth gathering beneath your awareness, not rising or falling, just existing as a soft glow that fills the inner space without moving. This warmth is not tied to emotion. It's not tied to memory. It's simply the comfort of being allowed to rest fully, gently, without expectation. Your thoughts become even lighter here. They move like faint ripples on still water. They don't disturb anything. They don't create stories. They appear, linger briefly, then dissolve back into the quiet without needing to be finished. And there is something soothing about that, something calming in knowing that nothing inside you is asking to be carried any further than this moment. Your emotions follow the same rhythm. They no longer arrive in currents or waves. They settle into something like soft fog, warm, shapeless quiet. You don't need to understand them. You don't need to hold them. They wrap around your awareness without pulling you in any direction. And then slowly, you begin to feel the first true hint of rest, not sleep, but rest. The kind that comes when the body, mind, and heart all realize at the same time that nothing more is required tonight. There is no more depth to explore, no more shifts to sense, no more brightness to soften, only quiet, only warmth, only the gentle truth that you've reached a place inside yourself where even your inner world feels tired in a peaceful way. This is the doorway to rest, the threshold between wakefulness and letting go. You can feel it in how your awareness sits lower, heavier, softer. You can feel it in how your breath no longer tries to match the pace of your thoughts. You can feel it in how your emotions no longer search for shape. Everything inside you is folding into softness, preparing you for the final descent of the night. There is no need to force this descent. You don't have to guide it. You don't have to lean toward it. The night is carrying you toward it with the same tenderness it has shown you from the beginning. All you have to do is allow the quiet to hold you the way a warm hand holds a cool one, the way a soft blanket wraps around a tired body. Rest isn't something you enter. It's something you accept. Something that arrives when you're finally soft enough, quiet enough, human enough to meet it without resistance. You are in that place now, softened by the journey, lowered by the quiet, warmed by the depth you've moved through. You don't need to do anything more. Just be here. Let the breath move gently. Let the quiet deepen. Let the night guide you into the final, gentlest shift that awaits. There is a kind of quiet that doesn't arrive suddenly. It gathers. It thickens. It softens everything it touches until the edges inside you blur into something warm and weightless. You're entering that quiet now, the deepest part of the night, where nothing needs to rise anymore, where nothing needs to drift anymore, where nothing inside you needs to hold its shape. This is not an ending. It's more like a slow, dissolving, a gentle fading of all the layers you've passed through tonight. The brightness of your thoughts, the warmth of your emotions, the depth of your heart, the softness of your humanity. All of it begins to settle into a calm so steady that it barely feels like movement at all. It feels like sinking without falling, resting without sleeping, dissolving without disappearing. You may sense this shift first as a quiet widening in your awareness, not outward inward, a spreading kind of stillness that doesn't erase anything but smooths every contour until each part of your inner world feels warmed into silence. Thoughts lose their distinctness, feelings lose their outlines. The earlier glow inside you thins into something even softer, something like a warm hush settling across your entire inner landscape. Nothing pulls at you now, nothing tugs, nothing echoes. Even the emotional presence that lingered gently beneath your thoughts has quieted into a low, steady hum that feels almost like a soft hand resting on your chest. There's no demand hidden in this sensation, no urgency, no instruction, just presence, warm, steady, patient. The world inside you becomes rounder here, softer, as if every sharpness you carried earlier has melted into a gentle haze. Even your breath moves differently, not slower, not deeper, just quieter, like it has joined the rest of your inner world in lowering itself into stillness. Each inhale feels lighter. Each exhale feels longer, not because you're adjusting it, but because your body recognizes the quiet and matches it instinctively. You may feel a sensation of spaciousness as everything settles, a sense that your awareness is expanding and sinking at the same time, expanding into softness, sinking into warmth. These sensations don't compete. They move together the way two slow currents merge into one wider, calmer drift. Your thoughts no longer come as thoughts at all. They arrive more like faint impressions dissolving before they even reach the surface of your awareness. You know they exist somewhere inside you, but they don't form. They don't build. They don't ask to be followed. They float like small warm particles suspended in something deeper, something quieter. Emotions behave the same way. They no longer rise. They no longer shift. They rest. They become part of the atmosphere rather than movements within it. Even the heavier tones feel light now, woven seamlessly into the softness. You're not carrying them. They're simply present with you, blending into the warm quiet that surrounds everything inside you. If you listen to your inner world now, you'll hear almost nothing, just a gentle silence that feels alive, not empty. This silence doesn't isolate you. It holds you. It wraps itself around your awareness the way the deepest part of night wraps itself around the world softly, steadily, without boundary. There's a kind of peace here that you don't reach during the day. Not because the day is wrong, but because the day is full, bright, sharp. The night strips away all that brightness until only the essentials remain: your breath, your presence, your quiet humanity. And when those essentials meet the stillness you've reached tonight, they melt into something you can only feel, not describe. You may notice your body softening in small ways, the way your shoulders seem to lower, the way your hands feel warmer, the way your eyelids carry more weight, even if they're already closed. These sensations aren't signs of tiredness. They're signs of letting go, signs that your inner world no longer needs to hold itself upright, signs that the lowering from earlier has completed its path and brought you into the deepest calm you can reach while still awake. This is the part of the night where everything inside you feels unified, not because you've organized anything, but because the quiet has woven every inner thread into a single warm stillness. You no longer drift between thought and feeling, memory and softness, depth and warmth. Everything is one quiet presence now, a presence that asks nothing of you, expects nothing from you, and gives you space simply to be. If you stay with this sensation, you may notice how time feels different here. Slower, wider, almost suspended. Nothing pushes you toward the next moment. Nothing pulls you back to the previous one. You exist in a kind of gentle now, a moment that doesn't need to be filled, doesn't need to be shaped, doesn't need to be understood. And in this suspended quiet, you may feel an almost imperceptible shift, not movement, not descent, but loosening. A slow untying of whatever small knots remained inside you. A lightening that doesn't lift you upward, but settles you more deeply into your own presence. It feels like sinking into warm water, like being carried by something softer than thought, gentler than emotion. This is the deepest part of the night, the place where you don't have to think or feel or process or drift. The place where your inner world becomes so soft that even the act of noticing begins to dissolve. You don't need to follow anything inward anymore. The quiet has become complete, whole, warm. You don't disappear in this quiet. You just stop holding yourself together. And that, more than anything, is what rest truly feels like. The moment when your mind steps back, your heart softens, your breath settles, and your presence becomes light enough to be carried by the darkness around you without resistance. You're safe in this warmth, safe in this stillness, safe in this gentle fade. Here, there are no layers left to explore, no patterns left to notice, no shifts left to witness. Only quiet, only warmth, only you resting in the softest place the night can offer.